Welcome to KeepItReal Studios, the only channel on YouTube that keeps it real.
In recent years, the UFC has become one of the most beloved sports in this world. From its exciting fighters, to exciting fights, and just legendary moments to forever remember, the UFC has taken over this world. And this actually brings me into the topic of today's video. I kind of want to talk about a couple questions that live rent-free in the fans' minds. These are some questions that have the whole MMA community on its axis. You know, MMA fans can be quite toxic and quite passionate about some of these subjects when it comes to talking about their favorite fighters, their favorite moments, and just the UFC overall. Now, how this questionnaire is going to work is I'm going to ask you a series of multiple questions and I'm going to go one by one. I'm going to give you my thoughts, my opinions, and how I feel about the question, and also kind of comment down below how you feel about each question. I want to kind of hear everybody's thoughts and opinions and what they have to say. Now, the first question on my list is actually Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Islam Makhachev. So now this question is actually a two-parter. The first one is who will win in their primes respectively, and the second one is who has the better legacy. Focusing on the first part of the question, if I had to match these two fighters up against each other, I would most likely have to give it to Khabib, because I truly believe Khabib was very much more dominant than Islam. Islam is very well-rounded, he's a very good striker, and he's a very good wrestler. But the thing is, when you look at Islam's fights, he's not really as dominant as Khabib was in his prime. Islam, you definitely tend to see him struggle from time to time when facing opponents. Don't get me wrong, there are moments where he's kind of dog-walk a lot of people, but there's also questionable fights where he actually kind of went through the ringer. But if you look on Khabib's fight, this guy has never bled, his takedowns were just unstoppable, and even Khabib's striking at moments were kind of underrated too as well. So in terms of them fighting as an overall, I think I would have to lean towards Khabib. Now, if we're just focusing on legacy, I do believe like Khabib is more beloved and kind of revolutionized the sport in some aspects and terms. But when I'm looking at just like the resume and what they've truly accomplished, I kind of have to give it to Islam. Because if you look at Khabib's career, he kind of fought not the best fighters. It was more towards his end of his career that he started to fight big names. And if you really stop and look at it, Khabib's best win arguably came up against Dustin Poirier. And even Islam Makhachev has a win over Dustin Poirier too. But if we're focusing on Islam's career, he has 2 wins over Volk, he has wins over like fighters like Charles Oliveira, he has wins over Dan Hooker. You know, there's countless people that he has good wins up against in terms of his resume, but I feel like Khabib's legacy is just undeniable. You know, he still has 29-0. You know, he just created such a huge thing in the sport, and just his beef with just like Conor McGregor was such an amazing thing back in the day. So overall, I think I still have to kind of give it to Khabib. I feel like in terms of resume and what they're doing for the sport, I'll have to kind of give it to Islam, because Islam is still the champion and he's still currently active. And by the looks of it, I feel like Islam is chasing double champion status. And if he's able to actually get it, then I'll probably say Islam has a better legacy. Moving on to the next question. So this question is going to be solely based on 2 fights that I'm going to list. And I want you to tell me which fight would you rather want to happen. Starting off, Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler or Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I feel like I might get a lot of backlash for this, but honestly, I'd rather see Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Because, I don't know, I feel like just having Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler going up against each other, it's just going to be entertaining. You know, a Conor McGregor fight always sells out. It'll be something good for the UFC. And you know, we were supposed to have the fight last year, then it ended up being cancelled just because of Conor McGregor's issues. And I also kind of feel bad for Michael Chandler, man. This guy's been waiting for so long, came back, lost to Oliveira. You know, a lot of people are disappointed in Mike Chandler. So I feel like at this point, just kind of give him the fight and just let him walk off into the sunset with that payday. But overall, I do believe the better fight for the company and just stylistically would be Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But honestly, I don't really care too much about the Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall fight. What really bugs me is that the interim champion isn't fighting the heavyweight champion. That's the real issue I have with that, because I don't understand how the heavyweight champion is ducking the interim champion. Like right now, Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall have the same amount of title defenses. Like that doesn't make sense. The interim champion should always fight the heavyweight champion to unify the belts. So that's kind of always been my problem with Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, them denying Tom Aspinall his rightful match to have. That's the kind of problem I have with Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But overall, that doesn't really mean much to me. I feel like if Jon Jones retired right now, it's not the end of the world. I wouldn't really mind. He walks off into the sunset. I'm okay with that. My only main problem is that Tom Aspinall is not getting his championship fight. On to the next question. This one is going to be the featherweight division versus the lightweight division. So this question is actually a two-parter. The first one, I'm just going to be talking about the division overall throughout the legacy of the UFC. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit tricky, because I feel like the legacy of the featherweight division is so iconic because of how many few champions that they have. Every champion has been so dominant and been the reigning defending champion for such a long time, just throughout many different eras. So I kind of have to give it to the featherweight division in terms of just competitiveness and just the championship status that they had. But if we're just focusing on overall excitement and just the fighters and star power, I would have to give it to the lightweight division, man. If we're just looking at all the fighters that we have in the lightweight division, both past and present, you kind of have to give it to the lightweight division. Now, on to the second part of this question. I'm going to be putting the top 5 fighters in both the featherweight division and the lightweight division up against each other. So starting off with the number 5th position. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky because Max Holloway is ranked in both divisions, but I'm going to keep Max Holloway in the featherweight division for now, and I'm going to take him out of the 5th position and I'm going to go with the 6th fighter, which is Dan Hooker. So I'm going to put up against Yair versus Dan Hooker, and I feel like this one is pretty obvious. I will have to give it to Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker is quite a zombie, you know, he can just kind of eat big shots, walk through a lot of things, and I do believe he has better power than Yair. I feel like Yair Rodriguez, I feel like his best performance was up against Max Holloway and he still lost, you know. Arguably his fight against Josh Emmett was pretty good too, but I feel like if you put him up against somebody like Dan Hooker, he wouldn't be so well, and I feel like Dan Hooker also has underrated ground game, so I feel like Dan Hooker can get him out of there. In the number 4th position, we have Movsar Evloev versus Dustin Poirier. Now this one is quite tricky and kind of hard for me to actually pick a fighter to win, because we do know in the past Dustin Poirier does struggle with, you know, heavy grapplers. But you know, in his recent fight with Islam Makhachev, he did show to improve on his takedown defense and his overall wrestling. And you know, Movsar, he's more of like a decision kind of fighter. He doesn't really stop in his opponents and he doesn't really submit his opponents. But just because of Dustin Poirier's experience and especially his championship experience and his grit, and I feel like if we went to 5 rounds and you can't really stop Dustin Poirier, I believe Dustin Poirier will manage to get the victory. This is a little bit of a harder fight because, you know, Movsar, he is undefeated, and you know, a lot of undefeated fighters do have that championship mindset. But just because of his experience, and Dustin Poirier, he's a dog, I think I might just have to go with Poirier on this one. Next on the list, we have the 3rd ranked opponent in the featherweight division and the lightweight division is Diego Lopez versus Justin Gaethje. And honestly, I'm most likely going to go with Diego Lopez, man. I truly feel like Justin Gaethje can be a little bit overrated at times, because if you really stop and think about it and look throughout Justin Gaethje's career, he's pretty much a brawler with a good chin. You know, he just takes shots, he can eat them, and he has very good hooks. I feel like lately in most of his fights, he has been a lot technical and gotten a little bit better at controlling in his brawl, but I feel like if you put him in a very close fight and you kind of stay in the pocket with him, you see that tendencies come, you know. If you watch a lot of Justin Gaethje fights, he's kind of flip-flopping all over the octagon. He would throw a hook, then he would kind of fall over himself too. So that's the thing about Justin Gaethje. I feel like in some terms he can be a little bit overrated. I'm not saying he's a bad fighter, but I do believe he's overrated, and I do believe Diego Lopez is more technical. And you know, Justin Gaethje never uses his best assets, which is just wrestling. I think I would have to give it to Diego Lopez. I feel like even if they went down, I feel like Diego Lopez would be better at submitting Justin Gaethje in that terms. And I feel like Max Holloway really exposed like the game plan you need against Justin Gaethje. So I think I would have to go and favor Diego Lopez. Focusing on the number 2 ranked fighters in the featherweight division and the lightweight division, we have Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira. Now, this is a fight that's actually happened in the past. A lot of people tend to forget about it, but Max Holloway does have a win over Charles Oliveira. It was kind of a weird stoppage. This was kind of around the time where Charles Oliveira was known as a quitter. But right now, they're both different fighters. They've both evolved. They've both been champions. And this is most likely a fight that we're probably going to see sometime this year because, you know, Max Holloway is moving up to the lightweight division. And honestly, I think this is a 50-50. I feel like Max Holloway has a good opportunity of beating Charles Oliveira, and I do believe Charles Oliveira has a good opportunity of defeating Max Holloway. I feel like it depends on how the fight goes. You know, if it's more standing, I feel like Max Holloway can edge it out, but if it goes to the ground, I do see Charles Oliveira winning, but I don't really see Charles Oliveira even submitting Max Holloway, and I don't really see Max Holloway knocking out Charles Oliveira, and vice versa. You know, I feel like this might be a very close fight that can even go to decision. So I'm actually a little bit 50-50 on this fight. I actually don't really know how it's gonna turn out. I kind of want to say I do want to favor Max Holloway just in terms of the lighter man skill, and I feel like if Charles Oliveira really can't submit you or take you to the ground, he will have a lot of problems with Max Holloway. But I still think you can't really doubt Charles Oliveira. You know, he's a dog. But I don't know, I feel like sometimes Charles Oliveira has some questionable moments. Like, I feel like he gets knocked down a lot, even in his last fight with Michael Chandler in the 5th round almost took him out. But I feel like if Max Holloway hurts you, just the amount of pressure and his volume can kind of get you out. I do kind of have to lean towards Max Holloway. I don't think I can really 100% just pick Max Holloway against Charles Oliveira. But this is a fight I do believe we're going to probably get very soon. It would be a very nice rematch to see because the last fight, you know, really wasn't a good ending. So I don't know. This one, I don't really have a definite answer. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. I don't really have a definite answer for these two. And in the number 1 position in both divisions, you have Alexander Volkanovski versus Arman Tsarukyan. And honestly, I feel like Arman Tsarukyan will beat Alexander Volkanovski because I feel like just Volk coming off those 2 back-to-back knockouts, I truly feel like that has kind of taken Volk out of his prime. I do believe he's out of his prime. I can't just really see him beating Arman Tsarukyan because Arman Tsarukyan, every fight, I feel like he truly gets better. And I actually think it's going to be a big problem from Islam in their upcoming fight at UFC 311. So it's going to be very hard to kind of bet against Arman Tsarukyan. If this was Prime Volk, I would 110% give it to Volk because I do believe Prime Volk was a beast. But I think as of right now, in terms of the career and where they're at, just fighting wise, mindset wise, I would have to give it to Arman Tsarukyan. Now, last but not least, we have the 2 champions of each respective division. We have Ilia Topuria and we have Islam Makhachev. I truly believe this fight is 50-50. I can definitely see Ilia Topuria beating Islam, and I can also see Islam beating Ilia Topuria. You know, these two are very high-level skilled fighters, and their confidence is off the charts, and they're both very well-rounded, and they both possess just the power to stop their opponents at any given time. So I truly believe it's 50-50, but if I did have to pick a fighter to win, I do have to kind of lean towards Islam because, you know, he is the pound-for-pound champion. You know, he's proven himself countless times, so I would have to go with Islam in that aspect, but I can also still see Ilia Topuria beating Islam. So this one is a little bit 50-50, but if I did have to pick a fighter, I have to pick the pound-for-pound king himself, Islam Makhachev. For my next question, it's actually a ranking-based question. I'm going to list a couple fighters and tell me who do you believe is the most dominant out of all these fighters. Tom Aspinall, Hamza Chimaev, Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, and Alex Poatan Pereira. And if I'm being honest, I have been struggling for days. While making this thing, I honestly couldn't really think what the ranking system should look like because all these fighters are super dominant. A lot of them are undefeated or haven't been defeated in a long time. I would say in terms of number 1, I feel like that's kind of easy, Tom Aspinall, because, you know, this guy is allergic to any fight past the 1st round. You know, he has the shortest fight time in UFC history. So in that terms, I do have to give it to Tom Aspinall as number 1. Maybe Ilia Topuria in number 2 because, you know, he is undefeated to his wall and he's just kind of knocking out opponents back-to-back, the featherweight ghosts. So those were the 2 kind of easiest ones I could rank. But in terms of Islam, Hamza, and Alex Pereira, I was kind of having difficulty. Maybe Hamza next because he's still undefeated. Then I'll probably have to put Islam, then Alex Pereira. But see, that doesn't make sense to me, putting Alex Pereira as number 5 and putting Islam as 4th. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about this question. I can't really even truly rank this one. The only ones I'm really confident on my answer is Tom Aspinall and Ilia Topuria. Those are the only 2 fighters I'm confident with my ranking list. So please comment down below, how would you rank these fighters and who do you believe is the most dominant? Comment down below, tell me what you think because I've been struggling to actually kind of rank these fighters. Now on to the last question. This is arguably one of the most debatable topics in UFC history. Who is the greatest of all time? And if I'm being honest, my thoughts and opinion on this are there's no such thing as the greatest of all time in the UFC. Because when you stop and think about it, all the arguable fighters that you consider the GOATs, they all come from different eras and they're all spread across different weight divisions. So it's very hard to kind of compare all of these fighters because, you know, the competition is very different across weight classes. And also, I'm a firm believer that the fighters of now are better than the fighters back then. The competition's better, the skill gap is a lot more different, and the sport just evolves. As time progresses on, things just tend to evolve, grow better, and adapt. For example, if you're looking at former champion Michael Bisping, he has fought countless legends like GSP, Anderson Silva, Luke Rockhold, and he actually won some of them. But you know, he has never been hit with a single calf kick throughout his whole historic run in the UFC.
from 2006, isn't it wild when you look at the change in the games of these fighters? Like how much more there's so many guys that are coming up, like where you're seeing them for the first time in the octagon, like one of their first fights, and you're like, Jesus Christ, these people are so good.
Calf kicks.
Yes.
They didn't exist when I was fighting. I've never taken a calf kick. I have no idea what they feel like. They look like they hurt. They look, because people fall on the floor and they get red and swollen and they look nasty.
Yeah.
But there you go. I mean, that's the evolution of the sport.
Watch any UFC fight currently to this date, fighters are throwing calf kicks left and right. You know, you have fighters like Alex Pereira, Justin Gaethje. Those like are their favorite movesets to be doing. The calf kick is such a different sport, and we've seen people break their legs. We've seen calf kicks be used to actually help win fights in the past. So I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as the UFC GOAT, because, you know, weight classes are different. And there's a lot of questionable things that you can kind of put up against on who's the GOAT of the UFC. And just weight classes make it different, you know? Can't really have a definitive GOAT in the UFC. I feel like the times are just different, the weight classes are different, and the opponents are different. So I truly believe there's no such thing as a UFC GOAT. The UFC community likes to have a lot of topics, discussions, and debates on certain different questions. And that's why I kind of made this video today, just to kind of give my own thoughts and opinions on some of these questions. And I thought it would also be fun to kind of add my own elements and my own new questions, because some of these questions I'm very iffy on. You know, some of them I didn't really have a definitive and strong answer. And that's why I really wanted to make this video. You know, I really wanted to spark a debate, kind of see what the MMA community kind of thinks about each and every single question. So please just comment down below, just kind of going through each question that I asked and tell me what are your thoughts and opinions. I know the MMA community like to be toxic and they're very passionate about their answers, but I kind of want to have a spark of friendly debate in the comment section. Tell me all what you think about each question I asked. But in overall honesty, that'll be it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to keep it real.